বৰঠাকুৰ IS একাডেমি প্ৰস্তুতি আৰু অধ্যয়নৰ নিৰ্ভৰযোগ্য ঠিকনা।
Hello everyone, welcome to the Hindu analysis for 27 July 2021. Let us begin with the first article today. Microbes from human animal excreta found above desirable limits in Yamuna. Now recently we discussed in length about the pollution levels in river Ganga and river Brahmaputra, particularly river Ganga, because there was a recent study conducted by an NGO, Delhi-based NGO particularly, that indicated and showed a large amounts of microplastics being found in large stretches of river Ganga, particularly in cities of Varanasi and other areas. Now, in addition to that, we discussed what are the adverse effects of having high levels of marine pollution in water, and particularly with the high levels of concentration of microplastics in the marine environment, how detrimental it is to ecosystem, and on the flip side, how dangerous it is for humans because of the consumption of microplastics. Because what happens or what ends up happening is these microplastics do end up in the food chain, and they kind of tend to wreak havoc on both the marine ecosystem and the human health aspect of it also. Now, on the flip side of it, that was in regards to presence of microplastics, which are non-organic materials. Now we have a situation in river Yamuna in regards to pollution through organic material. Now a recent study was conducted and in their submission to the Ministry of Jal Shakti, the report indicated that they found microbes of both human and animal excreta in river Yamuna, and the limits that they found were above desirable limits. Now particularly the levels of fecal coliform that are microbes from human and animal excreta are at dangerous levels. The study found such levels of bacteria, particularly microbes from both animal and human excreta, that they don't even recommend people having a bath in river Yamuna right now, because they observed that it is very difficult to achieve even bathing quality standards of the river water, because they clearly saw an absence of minimum environmental flow, that is flow of water. So to spell any misunderstandings, an environmental flow is the water provided within a river or a wetland or any coastal zone to maintain the ecosystem and their benefits, where there are competing water users and where water flows are regulated. To make it simple, in an environmental flow, the water has its source, it travels without any obstructions, meaning there are no dams in the path or there are no diversions, and the river water is not being diverted for human consumption or any other use cases. So the water or the river remains untouched from human interference. That is a normal and a natural environmental flow. But remember, due to the intervention of a human, these environmental flows are disturbed, because either by farmers or any other necessity the water is diverted from the river. Secondly, these natural flows are obstructed by the construction of dams, levees, or whatever it is. So that is what they are saying here. Particularly in the case of river Yamuna, there is a clear absence of a minimum environmental flow. So generally, because of our use cases of rivers or our dependency for survival on rivers, we came up with a minimum standard for environmental flow. Meaning, we said that forget about the natural environment flow, which is actually good for the ecosystem and both for the humans also. But because of our dependency on rivers and the water resources, we said that okay, forget about the natural aspect of it. We'll set a standard that ensures the minimum survival of the ecosystem in the river, and also ensures that the water doesn't go beyond acceptable limits of pollution. But in this case, in the case of river Yamuna, Even that minimum environmental flow that we ourselves set as a standard is not being seen here. Now, because of that, particularly, this water is not even advisable to have a bath in. Such are the levels of pollution, particularly organic pollutions in river Yamuna. This is the worst case scenario that any river in India can have, and it seems Yamuna tops the chart as of right now. Particularly when they conducted the study, they found that a 22-kilometer stretch of Yamuna from Wazirabad to Okla in Delhi, which is less than 2% of the length of the river. Remember, 22 kilometers is just 2% of the entire length of river Yamuna, and this 2% accounted for about 80% of the pollution load that the river is being, or that these scientists or these researchers are seeing in the river entirely. So if you take away that 22-kilometer stretch and you look at the entire ecosystem of the river, it is absolutely fine. Yes, there are pollution levels there, but they are well within acceptable limits. But when you introduce this 22-kilometer stretch that lies between Wazirabad and Okla in Delhi, they contribute 80% of the pollution load that the river is experiencing. So again, this boils down to how we are managing our solid waste, how we are managing our wet waste, our sewage water and all. And it seems whatever we do, how much ever we spend, until and unless our behavior changes and our mentality towards our water resources changes, things aren't going to change, and this is going to be a problem for people living in Delhi and surrounding areas. Remember, this 80% load travels downstream to other areas where they are dependent on water from this particular river, and again their health, their livelihood, again everything will be damaged. So I thought this would be interesting because we were discussing how microplastics were wreaking havoc on river Ganga. On the other hand, we have river Yamuna, where organic matter, particularly coliform, fecal coliform, which is nothing but microbes from human and animal excreta, are wreaking havoc on the ecosystem of this particular river. Now moving on to the next article, Puri becomes first Indian city to provide quality drinking tap water. So this is interesting, right? Whenever you visit any other country, particularly let us say London or any other country in but let us go with certain states in US. California is one good example where you can actually drink water out of the tap directly. You don't need any filtration system. You don't need any purifier or any such thing. You can just simply go to the kitchen, you fill up your glass directly from the tap, and you can consume it. The water is of such high quality that you don't need any filtration systems in your houses or in your households to consume drinking water. In India, what happens is, if you are living in a house, either you consume your water from a bottling plant, that is, you get that 20 or 25 liter PET bottles if you can afford it. If you cannot afford it, you depend on the water that is being supplied by the respective municipality, and we kind of know what kind of quality that we consume if we dare enough to consume that water from the municipality supply. So this is not the case in almost all of the municipalities, but in India, majority of the municipal water that is being supplied, when tests were carried out, they were found to be non-consumable or harmful if consumed for longer periods of time. So that's the nature of water quality in our municipalities and in our country. But that's not the case in other countries and other major cities. When you go there, you can actually consume water from public water dispensers they have fountains, they have water dispensers around the city that you can consume water directly from. And if you are in a household, you can directly catch or fill the glass from the tap itself, and you can consume that water. So after when you look at that kind of access to drinking water and you come here, you have either two options. Either you can purchase a water bottle or a bottled water. Now for the first time, Puri, which is in Orissa, became the first city in India where people can avail high quality drinking water directly from the tap on 24-hour basis. So again, this is a welcome sign. The scheme that they inaugurated is called Drink from Tap. it allows citizens, particularly citizens of Puri city, to have high access to high quality drinking water directly from the tap on 24-hour basis. Now moving on to the next article, UK court deems Malaya bankrupt. So in a big win for Indian banks who are pursuing a case against Kingfisher Airlines owner Vijay Mallya, or Malaya as one calls him, the British court, which is hearing his case, which was hearing our bank's pleas and their counter arguments, on Monday granted a bankruptcy order against Vijay Mallya. Now, this essentially means that the consortium of Indian banks, which lended his company Kingfisher Airlines huge amounts of money, and which he shunted out and escaped from India without paying his dues and his debt. Now, these companies can pursue a worldwide freeze order to seek repayment of his debt that he owns to these banks when they lended it to his airlines, now defunct airlines, that is Kingfisher Airlines. So what it essentially means is the consortium of banks which is being led by State Bank of India now can freeze assets that are owned by Vijay Mallya around the world, and they can use or they can sell those assets to recoup some of the loss that they experienced because of his non-payment of his loans. Now, as far as the case, the Indian banks argued for the bankruptcy order to be granted in their favor, and additionally, we are also pursuing an extradition case against him. As of now, he remains on bail in UK. You can see him walking around streets of London right now. He attends matches and everything. But there seems to be a confidential legal matter that the UK government is unwilling to share with public. We don't know whether they shared it with the Indian government or not. But as far as the public domain is concerned, they are saying that there is a confidential case going on in the courts of UK in regards to his extradition order. Then only the UK government said that once that confidential matter is settled, we will allow, or we'll think about, or we'll talk about the extradition order of Vijay Mallya from UK to India. Again, as far as the public domain is concerned, there is a confidential matter which we believe related to his asylum petition or asylum application, meaning Vijay Mallya had applied for an asylum in UK, citing some unknown threats to his life or his livelihood in India. So they are saying that it's a confidential matter, and unless his asylum application, which is rumored to be an asylum application, we cannot proceed with his extradition proceedings. Again, the theory is that, which is not confirmed, just a theory, that he had applied for asylum in United Kingdom. So unless that asylum application is cleared, his extradition process is on hold. But India is positive that during multiple engagements with their respective counterparts, Ministry of External Affairs and PMO has also engaged with their respective counterparts in UK in regards to his extradition, Nirav Modi's extradition, and Lalit Modi's extradition also to a greater extent, but Lalit Modi is not being extradited as of right now. The two cases that India is actively pursuing is one of Nirav Modi and Vijay Mallya. Again, we have to wait and see, but nonetheless, this is a huge win for Indian banks. So, in a process to recover the debt that he owns to these consortium of banks. So, moving on to the next article, today's entire newspaper might be tilted towards environment because Southern Europe battles wildfires as Northern cleans up after floods. So, Europe, or the continent of Europe, is experiencing two extremities of weathers on either side of their borders, meaning on either side of their extremities. On northern side, you are seeing heavy floods in countries like Austria, UK and Germany. On the southern side, in the cities of Italy, in the cities of Greece, particularly Italian islands of Sardinia, you are seeing huge wildfires raging across hectares, thousands of hectares of forest land and civilian land. Now, wildfires are burning in regions across southern Europe to greater extent that it is having a huge impact on their respective economies because they are unable to control these wildfires, and these countries are struggling to gather resources to fight against these raging wildfires. Again, these wildfires are being fueled by extreme hot weather and strong winds in the region. Now, this is at the southern end of Europe. On the northern end of Europe, as I said earlier, you are seeing huge floods in Germany, Austria, and UK. If you have been following social media for the past 2 or 3 weeks, you see videos of cities, towns being washed away in Germany where they hadn't seen floods in hundreds of years. So that is the extremities that Europe is experiencing right now. On one side, you have extreme floods, heavy rainfall. On the other side, you are having deadly wildfires. Now, in Greece, the Prime Minister said that their firefighters have battled around 50 fires during the past 24 hours alone. Imagine how many resources are being diverted to address this issue or fight the fires. On the Italian islands of Sardinia, firefighting planes from Greece and France are supporting the firefighters on ground where more than 4,000 hectares of forest were destroyed in the fire. See, this is 4,000 hectares of pristine forest that has been completely decimated by wildfires. Now let us look at Spain. The northeastern region of Catalonia saw more than 1,500 hectares destroyed due to wildfires, which led to dozens of evacuations in the areas surrounding this region. Now, in particularly southern Europe, we are seeing that on the northern side of the Europe, rainstorms are lashing out on countries where they are experiencing catastrophic flooding, and this also led to mass evacuations in those regions. Particularly Germany was hard hit with this rainstorms that led to untold number of deaths as of right now. On the other hand, the loss of life is one thing. Because of this unprecedented flooding, there has been a huge loss of infrastructure too, which is yet to be calculated. So scientists are saying you can kind of contribute or attribute these kinds of extreme weather events on either side of the European continent or subcontinent. European continent, not subcontinent, European continent, to climate change. But remember, this is again at the end of the day where people are still debating as to what should be the ground rules in order to achieve climate change goals, either in G7, G20 or in United Nations. So again, this gives you a perspective as to how countries are paying the price for not adhering to their respective scientists in terms of their ability to control their emissions, their climate and whatnot. Again, this is one aspect of the argument. On the other side of the argument, they are saying this is once in a century events. These are once in lifetime weather events. But nonetheless, at the end of the day, it is these weather events, extreme weather events, that India is also experiencing. Mind you, India is currently going through a flooding situation. On one side, recently India was also fighting wildfires in northeastern states where Indian military was engaged in fighting these wildfires. But for whatever reason, they did not get that much coverage as it should have gotten. But nonetheless, currently India is experiencing heavy floodings in the state, heavy or catastrophic flooding in the states of Maharashtra also, where huge loss of life has been noted. Now, moving on to an editorial, Wounded Mountains. So recently there was a landslip in Kinnaur district of Himachal Pradesh, which led to tragic death of 9 tourists when boulders from a hillside. So the landslip was a result of an instability or instability on the hillside, which led to huge boulders rolling down from top of the hill and landing on bridges and vehicles that were parked in the surrounding areas. and as a result of it, 9 tourists lost their life in this landslip. Now, one thing that this points to, or this tragic accident points to, is the fragility of the ecology of the Himalayan states. Whenever we talk about Himalayan states or the ecology of Himalayan states, the primary thing that comes into discussion is the existence of huge hydro projects in that region. Almost all of Himalayan states are dependent on these hydro projects for both in terms of economy and in terms of their energy needs. Particularly, let us look at the case of Himachal Pradesh, where a 2018-19 standing committee, that is a parliamentary standing committee on energy, noted that if done correctly, the state of Himachal Pradesh can double its existing hydropower potential to 10,547 megawatts. Now, that is one aspect of it. The harnessing of hydropower potential from these Himalayan states is one aspect of it. On the other end of the spectrum is the discussion or the discussion surrounding the fragility of the ecology of these Himalayan states. Now, we know that these states have been pummeled by rain recently, leaving many hill slope unstable and have caused floods in built-up areas, including Dharmashala. Now, we know that we have been experiencing large-scale flooding in these areas, also causing to loss of life and property. Now, with this recent tragic event, what was being brought forward is the discussion surrounding how to protect the fragility of the ecology in these states. Now, this case or this situation is not only limited to Himachal Pradesh, it is also extended to neighborhood states like Uttarakhand and other states. Now, what researchers are noticing in these states, these Himalayan states, is they may be entering a phase of irreversible decline because of losses to their ecology. This loss to their ecology has led to frequent landslides, which is again dangerous to both economy and population, because when there is frequent cases of landslides, there is less chance that people will settle in that or in those areas. Now, these hill states have adopted a developmental model that may not be suitable to their ecology, right? Predominantly, their economic model survives on two things. Primarily, it is driven by two sectors. One is the tourism sector and the second is hydroelectric projects. And we are seeing large scale construction activity in terms of hydroelectric projects. Now, when you construct a hydroelectric project in these areas, this not only destroys forests, it also stems the flow of rivers' natural flow. In the first article, we discussed about their environmental flow. Because of this construction of hydro projects, the environmental flow of the rivers, the natural rivers, is curtailed. That again translates into changing something that shouldn't be changed. It is again invitation to harm. You don't know what impact this construction activity would have on the economy or ecology in long term. Now, again, as I said, these states adopted an economic model that is dependent on tourism and large-scale construction activity, particularly in lieu with hydroelectric projects. Now, when researchers were studying 2015 Nepal earthquake, which kind of wreaked havoc on the Nepal economy and their psyche to a greater extent, they point to a high seismic activity which results in causing fatal landslides in that area, and whoever is surviving downstream of that project. Now, because of this repeated catastrophic weather events, we are seeing frequent and heavy losses of ecology in Himachal Pradesh and other Himalayan states, and we are seeing their ecological base being eroded away. One, due to these repeated weather events, catastrophic weather events, and On the flip side, you are seeing these states, Himalayan states, carrying out large scale construction activities. It can only be said that with a disregard towards the long term effects of carrying out such activities or such construction activities in these ecologically fragile ecosystems. Again, if things continue the way they are continuing right now, we are going to see large scale landslides, frequent landslides happening in this region. And again, if it happens in an uninhabited region, it can be managed. But if it happens in areas where there are hydropower projects that are being constructed or completed construction, then again the damage would be unimaginable. So what we need right now is a policy or an economic model that that is built on preserving whatever the natural riches that these states have, and adopting an economic model that doesn't depend on exploiting these natural riches of these fragile Himalayan states. Remember, they are seismologically active, so they experience seismic activity on a frequent basis. And again, we don't have a concrete understanding as of what would be the long-term impact of such large-scale constructions in these areas. So moving on to the next article, India engages Taliban but questions Pakistan's support. Now India is saying that India is engaging with all stakeholders in Afghanistan, including some parties of or some parts of Taliban. Now this is part of a multi-track strategy that India adopted, which was necessitated by the advances that Taliban is making on ground in Afghanistan. Mind you, major urban cities are still under the control of the government. What Taliban effectively controls are the tribal areas and rural areas. But recently, the Afghan government has also mounted a huge scale offensive against the Taliban as a retaliatory act, and they are gaining control of some territory that was lost to Taliban in the last few weeks, post announcement of US troop withdrawal by the end of August. Now, the government is saying that, or essentially the government is hinting that whatever the talks that we are having with Taliban right now do not dilute India's concerns over Taliban's recent gains in Afghanistan that they were able to achieve with the support of Pakistan. So we are seeing or noticing a case where Pakistan is supporting Taliban fighters by either material or through its air force, where recently the Afghan government came out and said that Pakistan actually threatened their government that if Afghan government does take any offensive action against the Taliban terrorists or Taliban fighters, Pakistan Air Force would target their bases. Now this is again nor here or there, we cannot confirm or confirm whether they said it or not, but nonetheless that information came out. Now India has repeatedly reiterated that we support the Afghan government, right? We will deal with the Afghan government irrespective of who holds power in Kabul. So the case is so let us not go there. If the Afghan government falls in Kabul and Taliban gains control of governance in Afghanistan, India is stating that we are going to negotiate with Afghan government irrespective of who holds or controls Kabul. Now, India is also pursuing a policy where we are engaging with regional tribal warlords or tribal leaders, right? In Afghanistan, there is a case where regional warlords, as Americans call them, or regional tribal leaders as we call them, control or have a say in what goes in their territory. So we are also engaging with those leaders who come from all ethnic backgrounds, meaning they are either Afghani or Pashtun. That is, those are the two dominating tribes in Afghanistan, and Pashtun leaders are known to have inkling towards engaging with India. So we are also engaging with those regional tribal leaders who control those respective areas, militias who are also fighting against Taliban along with Afghan security forces. Now, the recent gain that Taliban has made is they are acquiring territory in border areas that Afghanistan share with other countries, regional countries. We saw Taliban controlling the border crossing with Iran, Tajikistan, and Uzbekistan. Now, we know that US is bent on pulling out its troops by the end of the August. So when they were initially pulling out and when they initially announced, they said that they are completely moving out of Afghanistan, meaning we are going to pull our ground troops and we are also taking away our air assets. Now recently, in the last 1 week or so, America seems to have changed their tactic in regards to their engagement or their presence in Afghanistan. As of yesterday, the American government indicated that they are pulling their boots from Afghanistan, but they are going to support Afghan security forces through their air force, meaning Afghan security forces will get the air support of America as of yesterday. Again, we don't know whether to what extent they'll support Afghan security forces, but nonetheless, this is a change of stance from America. Earlier, they said that we are completely out of Afghanistan. We have nothing to do with it. We are done. We are moving to East Asia right now. But in a change of track, they are saying that though we don't have boots on the ground, we'll support them through our air force, which again might turn the tide in favor of Afghanistan. Remember, one of the biggest advantages that Afghan security forces had over Taliban over all these years when they were fighting Taliban was the American air support aspect. Nobody can match the air superiority of America in that region. Even it will put Pakistan in check if America intends to allocate certain air assets to Afghan security forces. Again, we have to wait and see what this will entail and what holds for Afghanistan's future, because we are engaging with all the parties as of right now. With the Bulgan visit, we are also going to talk about Afghanistan, because at the end of the day, it is going to impact internal security of our own country. Thank you. Stay safe. Namaste.
বৰঠাকুৰ IS একাডেমি প্ৰস্তুতি আৰু অধ্যয়নৰ নিৰ্ভৰযোগ্য ঠিকনা। বৰঠাকুৰ IS একাডেমি।